Hi, welcome. So I am delighted to have with me tonight, first of all, Damien Kavanagh, who is MD of Tiger Aspect, who has got years of commissioning experience as the former controller of BBC Three, Daytime, Early Peak, CBBC, and former head of Factual at Channel 4. Alongside Damien, we have creative director, Kat Lynch, and head of development, Kate Stannard. You are from the entertainment indie Initial TV. And Kat and Kate have both had, this is going to be fun tonight, isn't it? Kat and Kate have both had years and years of experience of both development, pitching, and then obviously those things being commissioned. So can't wait to hear from you guys more about that. So can we kick off really with a round of applause for our panel, please? So all of these guys work under the Endemol Shine umbrella. So we're going to kick off with a quick taste of your work so we can see exactly what we're talking about. She says.
We didn't make all of these shows, by the way. We're 2 companies out of 20, much as I'd like to take credit for Black Mirror.
Very excited. We have real skill on show. Okay, what have we got?
I came to hear your questions.
Welcome aboard. This is Infinity.
What's the purpose of your visit? Pleasure.
You need sex, Samantha, as a matter of urgency.
Thank you. Ready for action, Dr. Walker?
In time, the humans will accept that.
Somebody needs to speak the truth. When I look at my expense. No, Kate, we would never do that. So dramatic.
Kind of, yeah.
This never come. Bad things come.
He is literally on the edge of life and death.
This is getting completely wrong direction.
It's the only way that we're going to save his life. Sometimes it's just not easy.
Congratulations!
To be frank, there's too much news. It's time to play tenable.
Celebrities are on the run.
Pushed to the limits of human endurance.
The stage is set. To get it wrong with family super. You're a class action. It may prove to be a masterstroke.
You guys are on fire!
Come on, what can I give you up?
Ready to tear down the knickers of this case and give it a good spanking.
So I've got a few of my favourite clips.
Thank you very much.
We ain't here to dance. We fire straight in.
Love might not solve our problems, but without it, we don't stand a chance. Absolutely brilliant, well done. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, great stuff. So I promise that you guys are going to get some time to ask some questions at the end. But first of all, I want to kick off with Kat and Kate. So can you talk to me, we're going to start with the idea. And so just how your development team at Initial even kind of come about with, you know, getting the idea in the first place in the outset.
Yeah. I think what people often, sort of when you say what you do as a job, people often go, oh my God, I'd totally run out of ideas. I don't know how I would keep coming up with things. And you do sometimes slightly worry about that. But I think you're quite focused. And so often, more often than not, you'll be given a brief by a commissioner who will have quite a clear idea of what they might want. And then it's how you find ideas that might fit into that or sort of build on what they've said to give them something they don't know they want yet, maybe.
Yeah, and I think the kind of, in terms of that, maintaining that kind of inspiration, I think that the sort of slight myth of the creative process is that suddenly you're just inspired by a fully formed, brilliant idea, and that is it, and it's good to go. I just don't know that many people for whom that happens. So I think the truth is it's loads and loads of hard work. You know, it's about a team of people, you know, in our case, building a team of people who, some of them are the people who generate tons and tons of ideas, and then others are the people who support them and stress test them, and you know, and actually I think the truth about it is it's a process, and you know, you don't run out of ideas because demands are constantly changing, tastes are constantly changing, and you know, for instance, you might, something that definitely gives you lots of inspiration is just the world around you, and kind of like sort of fads and, you know, things people are talking about in the news, and that's always changing.
So how do you bring those in? So it sounds like you're saying you kind of walk around constantly with your eyes open, whether that's social media, newspapers, posters, you know, going in kind of subconsciously.
So usually we'd get a brief from the channel, say it was E4 and they want a big reality show. So we'd all sit down in a room and then we'd just start a conversation, basically, is what a brainstorm essentially ends up being. And you go, oh God, I was sat with my friends at the weekend and we were talking about how we would best survive a zombie apocalypse. And then you start going, oh, is there anything in people doing that? And then someone goes, oh no, that's not great. And then you sort of move on to something that someone's read in the paper or something you heard someone say on a bus. And so you get inspiration from everywhere and things just occur to you as you're talking.
And you have to sort of sometimes really force it, because sometimes you're just feeling crap and tired and you're not feeling very inspired, and I think that's when you might bring out like really cringy games and stuff that like does feel a bit sort of laboured at first, but you have to, you know, whether you go, right, here's a list of 1980s movies and here's a list of you know, book titles, and we're going to pick one each out and we're going to say, what does that mean? What is that? And then, you know, it's probably nothing. But then, you know, then you start kind of veering off into, so it's worth, you know, it's a little bit forced, but I do think it's worth looking at those kind of creative games and creative sort of ways of refreshing you and your team. And, you know, I think it's worth mentioning as well that not to just think about brainstorming as an art form and how important it is to do it right. Because if you are negative, that's where the idea ends. You know, if you're the person who says, no, that's shit, or a version of that, that idea is definitely not going anywhere.
Yeah. I've heard Tina Fey talk about improv comedy, and I think it's a really similar thing. It's like a yes and, or even a no but. Like sometimes someone says something that you think might be stupid, but it's really sparks something in your head. And so it's always worth sort of saying any idea. So you have to really build trust in your team that it absolutely doesn't matter if you say the most rubbish, embarrassing thing, because we all do it.
So have you got a couple of rules, as in sort of like, no negative, no hierarchy? Because obviously you're bringing in, do you want to talk about actually who's even in the brainstorm from your...
Yeah, I mean, we have, so Kate's head of development, so she sort of runs the team day to day, and we've got a relatively small team. We have 2 APs and a junior researcher at the moment. I've been on big teams, been on small teams. You know, personally, I think that's about the right size. I think if you have too many, it starts feeling like you have too many ideas flying around, it's hard to prioritise.
I think different people run their teams differently. Like, I am not someone who, and some teams I've worked in are, that says to my whole team, tomorrow I want you to come in with 50 ideas and pitch them to me, because that's just not, I just think you're just going to panic and come up with 49 not very good ideas that I'm going to have to say no to in a nice way. So I think I much prefer it. And I think the best ideas come out of collaboration, because anyone can have the best idea in the room, because they might just happen to have had the conversation or read the thing that sparks the interest.
And that collaboration continues right past through pitching, doesn't it? The kind of, you know, you feel that everyone's building on it, and you know, it might not have been my idea, but I might have been the person to say, hang on, in round 3, we do a lot of quizzes, by the way. In round 3, if you eliminate someone there, then that will give loads of jeopardy, and suddenly that's the thing that Damien goes, oh, I love round 3.
I genuinely don't think I have ever commissioned an idea. Well, almost never commissioned an idea that's come fully formed. And I think one of the things you're going to have to prepare yourself is just to be able to have an open and collaborative conversation, and don't be defensive with people. It's about kind of allowing your idea to be examined and explored in the broadest context and see where it gets to, because the people on the channels will know what else is in development. They'll know what the audience is responding to in that moment. So I think really be prepared for it to maybe to go off in a different direction than you'd originally envisaged it.
Can I say my little pithy, be passionate, not precious?
Yeah.
That's my rule, one rule.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important point as well that you were making earlier about hierarchy within teams, and I think there's always a danger that the most senior people in teams can dominate the conversation, and that people wait for what they say and then follow. And an example I'd give you is when I was running Daytime and Early Peak at the BBC, somebody came in on a Monday morning. They'd been away with a partner that weekend, just out in the countryside, and they were in this pub. There was a plaque on the wall in the pub, and it was saying whatever town, I can't remember the town that was nearby. So the town grew up around the pub, and it was an old staging post. And I was saying, oh, that's really interesting. There must be more of these done. And this is a person who did admin inputting on the channel. And that eventually went on to be commissioned as a series with the hairy bikers called The Pubs That Built Britain. So ideas come from anywhere, and you know, nobody has ownership, and nobody is entitled to be the only person who comes up with an idea.
And we sometimes try, and because I'm really conscious that if I'm in a brainstorm, especially that sort of first seed ideas brainstorm, that just being there and happening to be the most senior person in the room can actually kind of make people too self-conscious to say the stuff that's always going to be a bit rubbish to begin with. So sometimes they'll just bring me in a bit later, just because I'm sure you same at Tiger, but just it's not that I'd be there. Just because it's hard to take off your kind of, but how would I pitch it to a commissioner hat? And actually early on, you just need to be kind of a bit freer, coming up with lots of things.
And not worry about whether it's makeable or cost £1 million an episode,
or we tried that
deal
before.
With that later. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's really hard. When you've been in development, versions of development as long as I have to stop myself being like, well, in 2007 we did monkey tennis this way, and you're like, no, but they might have different monkey tennis.
Exactly. And that's, I suppose, about the kind of breadth of the team, the types of people who are in your team, and the type of people that you can consult or speak to, because different people have a different perspective, and I think that's what can unlock it. You know, as a commissioner, you kind of hear the same ideas again and again and again, and then sometimes an idea will come along and it's just got a completely fresh perspective or a new way in, and I think that's what you're always looking for.
That's such a good point, and it's really, you'll see at the moment there's a lot of reboots happening. You know, I think it's because everyone wants to be like, I don't like today's world, I want to get back in time. But I think every conversation will be like, why are we doing it now? Why are we bringing this back? And I think it's usually the question that's asked of you when you're pitching any idea as well, is kind of, why now? And I think that's a good way of thinking as well, is kind of, is there a sort of an old territory that is ripe for being kind of remined, you know? Because actually often the sort of subject matters don't change that much. It's very rare to find a completely new area. But, you know, look at food programming. I mean, there's just when you think there can't be any more food shows, someone thinks of
a new idea.
Yeah. Or singing, you know, like our colleagues at Endemol, that all together now. You know, just when you thought, oh, God, there can't be another singing show. And it feels different. It does feel... So I think sometimes it's, don't put pressure on yourself to be completely reinventing the wheel.
Because there are only so many subjects probably that you can do, and if you just find that little twist on it, then it can be the difference between something that gets away or doesn't get away.
Have you got an example of one of the most like bizarre left field crazy shit ideas that actually has ended up being something that's even surprised you guys as being in development, where someone's just seen some potential in it and kind of then grown it into actually something that's like a feasible piece of content?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Or are they all mad, you see?
I mean, often though, it's more often the opposite, where you end up having it's quite boring, and you have to try and, you know, like, or as in like commission will be like, this is, you know, it's quite sort of rigid this is the slot and this is what we don't want and all of that is quite, so if you can come up with something zany within that. I mean, my favourite ever show I worked on, was a show for ITV2 a few years ago called The Almost Impossible Game Show. And that was, I don't know if anyone ever saw it, but that was pretty weird. Like, that was, at every turn I was like, I still can't quite believe they're still going with us on this. So the concept, the concept was quite simple. It was like the hardest game show in the world. It's so hard that you get 50 lives to complete 5 games, and every time you fail a game, you have to do it again and again and again. But they're all very painful games to do. But then we were just kept adding really weird layers to it, like these kind of crazy Irish voiceover artists called the Rubber Bandits, and at every point it was just got weirder and weirder. And what we ended up with, look it up, it was mental.
It's funny you say that, because the show that I think was the most bonkers idea that I've ever commissioned was a Rubber Bandits idea.
Oh, was it?
Called Blind Boy Undestroys the World. I don't know if you've seen it. And do people in the room know who the Rubber Bandits are? They wear a band, the Irish band from Limerick, and they wear plastic bags on their head and do kind of interesting songs and stuff. But they're incredibly smart. And Blind Boy is I think he's a lecturer at Limerick University, and he does a lot of kind of, topical current affairs based things. So we commissioned a show at BBC Three, which was kind of fact end, hidden camera stunts, absolutely underscored by really, really kind of tricky current affairs. So we did an episode on housing. You should watch it. But I think, when you kind of start having those conversations as a commissioner about those ideas, and all the bits start to fall into place, because when you run something like BBC Three, what has to be at the heart of it really is a sense of purpose. It has to be about something. And I think, a lot of good ideas, and kind of if you look at dramas or you look at across all the genres today, a lot of stuff that actually is saying something about the world or has a point to make about what it means to live today are the things that audiences are kind of are hooking into. So I think, have a look at Blind Boy and try and work out where it began and where it ended. And it's now commissioned as a series. Rumpus are making it an interesting show.
That's the other thing. What you end up seeing on telly is often quite different to the thing that you first said in the room, and which goes to Kat's point of not being too precious, because it is going to change anyway. By the time it's on screen, if God willing, it gets on screen, it will be totally different from that first thing you wrote down.
I can't stress that point enough. If you are defensive and precious about your idea and you won't let it evolve, whether that's in your brainstorm or when you're pitching to the commissioner, it's just not going to go anywhere, because it's never going to start off. And I think I've worked with so many people who it's just a fight. It's a fight and a battle daily, because they won't let you shape their idea. And ultimately, that's going to stop you getting employed. That is such a terrible, it's so unpleasant to work with. And it's yes, you should be passionate, and yes, you should fight for what you believe. And that's not to say you can't disagree with people, but if an idea isn't going anywhere and no one feels inspired by it, whatever, have another idea.
Or there's often a reason why there's just ideas that if a commissioner knows their audience really well, there's probably a good idea at the heart of it, but it's just the way that you're talking about it, the way you're talking about it, or imagine you're going to execute it, might not work for the audience. An example that I had once was when I ran CBBC, Alex Fraser, who ran Maverick, came to see me, and she wanted to do a show, which was at that stage a paediatric A&E show for, and I'd been involved in a hospital show years ago, and you kind of know with those shows, a lot of the jeopardy that you build in it is kind of false jeopardy. Not that many people die, and you kind of think when you're talking to 6 or to say what our audience,
but you're I need more dead people.
6 to 12-year-olds, you can't play with them like that. So you're kind of going, we just can't do this. So over kind of a long series of meetings, we were talking to it, and I was going, it's great having that kicking off. The jumping off point's amazing. That moment of drama of a child going in and saying, I don't know, something stuck on their finger and their finger's swelling massively. And then we ended up at, oh my God, that's a really interesting way into the kind of human biology and physiology. And that's where Operation Ouch grew off. But it grew, and that show is now in its, 7 or 8 series, and it's kind of got a live stage show. So these things will grow at a time if you just, and that's the whole point about sometimes let go. You've got the good idea at the heart of it. And if this commissioner can spot that, they'll continue a conversation with you.
So once you've got that good idea, how then do you articulate that and turn that into a formal treatment? So this is kind of the next stage of the process that you've got to go through.
Well, are we on to treatments now?
Yeah.
Good, I have a list. I think there is a sort. I mean, everyone writes differently, and every company does things differently. But I do think there are probably some fundamental things that if you kind of points for you to hit with a treatment, and by treatment we mean the thing you send. Well, you probably write it even when you've just had the idea, just to kind of solidify it in your brains. But ultimately, it's a thing you send the commissioner once you pitch to them. But just to quickly whiz through a few points, think about the title. It's really important, like increasingly important, because more and more you're just flicking through EPG or Netflix or whatever, and if it doesn't have a good title that tells you what the show is, you're not.
So if you can make the commissioner laugh with the title, they'll just
Definitely.
remember your idea, which is half the battle.
Yeah.
It sticks out.
We found an article once that just said hotter than my daughter.
Yeah.
And went into BBC Three, and this is years ago, and said, hotter than my daughter? And they went, yeah, and it literally was called Hotter Than My Daughter. And it was literally a makeover show where, like, I mean,
That's what happened with Dog Borstal.
not saying it was a beautiful piece of television, but that was literally almost sold on the title.
So you're saying, I mean, consider yourself as a consumer, right? So when you're going through, what would catch your eye to pull you in to watch it?
Yeah. And also, it says so much about the tone of the show. Like, as Kate says, if it's funny, you sort of know what you're getting yourself into. You know that's not going to be a hard-hitting documentary called Hotter Than My Daughter. And then, again, the order of this is sort of, but I think a little kind of hook or tease or something to sort of, get, whether that's a tagline or something like that, and then just lay the idea out so clearly, like what is the core concept. If you haven't understood that by like the first paragraph, pretty much, guys like him are just going to be bored and they're going to throw your thing away.
Well, I think, I used to have my commissioning days when I was at the BBC were on a Wednesday, and on a Wednesday I'd see Fact End guys, I'd see docs, I'd see comedy, I'd see entertainment, I'd have a chat with drama. So you've got a lot of stuff to read on that day. And I always found the moment I had to take my pen out and start creating a diagram to try and understand an idea, I was out. If it just doesn't grab you straight away. And I think one of the things just that probably is a useful discipline that we learnt on BBC Three, the environment now in which audiences are discovering content has changed so much, because it's fundamentally, most of, particularly for younger audiences, is in a video-on-demand environment where people can fall across a show on a television, on a live linear channel, because there's a latency to it and get hooked into it. But they're choosing based on a picture and a line of copy. That's it. And if you cannot crystallize your idea into that, and in a way that will give you a sense of what it is, the tonality of it, the sensibility that it has, you're not going to be watched. And then the show's not going to do well. And I was talking to someone at Netflix, I can't remember, but I'm sort of make up something, about I think the dwell time on an image on Netflix before somebody moves on is less than a second.
Yeah, it's like 0.5 seconds.
So it's like, you need to be grabbed there.
Yeah.
So if you can't articulate your idea, you're going to struggle, I think, in that kind of environment. And that a top line, just what we learned is subtlety doesn't work.
Yeah, because of that, increasingly, what we've been doing, taking to pictures now, rather than like a big presentation, is a poster with maybe one line on which sums up the idea in literally what would the poster for this show look like if Channel 4 were going to put it on a billboard.
And then I think if they have got past that and they're like, okay, we like the idea, then I think you need to tell us what we're going to see. A mistake I think I find quite a lot with junior members of staff is that they underestimate how much it takes for something to sustain for a series. Like sometimes you kind of get pitched something, you're like, that would be a good like round in a show, or you might get a one-off show out of that. But for a series, especially returning format, which is what the business we're in, you need to kind of show us what we're going to see every episode, how it's going to keep going for series after series, and then follow that up with why it's good, because if you're not going to sell your idea, no one's going to. And it's the same with the pitch. It's a bit embarrassing to be like, my thing is brilliant for these reasons, but they aren't going to tell you that. And there's ways of doing it without sounding like a twat. And so I think if you can kind of get that across, like, here's your point of what you'll see, and here's why it's good, I think that's really, really useful to remember.
And it's a real balance because you want to be really succinct, but it's not enough. My biggest development bugbear is when I read treatments and people say, and then they'll do some challenges to find out who the winner is. And you're like, well, what challenges? What? Like, be specific. Like, why would I see this challenge in this reality show and not the reality show on the other channel? So I think you have to be succinct but quite specific in what you're going to see.
So when junior development colleagues are kind of trying to, you know, even get you guys on board, right? Do you want stuff in a certain format, or how best do you find that exchange of somebody going, I've got this killer idea? Like, how do you want them to articulate it even to you, so then you can kind of, I suppose, form it, and then when it's going into the...
You know what? Before I got into TV, and even when I was in TV but wasn't going to pitch to commissioners, I think in my head I imagined pitches to be like on The Apprentice, where you go to like somewhere and you stand in your suit and you like read off your thing, and actually it's always just a conversation actually, like between human beings.
And that, but I think the kind of, I'd say in terms of a treatment and a pitch, it's just learning how to distill it down into what really matters. And I think those, you know, in the case of a game show or a reality show, it's pretty important to have some very, very good examples of the games. And
Damien, how important is it for you for people to think about audience when they're coming to you as a commissioner?
Really important. I think, you know, and you wouldn't believe the amount of time wherever, on whatever channel I've been working on, where it's patently obvious within the first 5 minutes of a conversation that somebody is not watching the channel, that they haven't seen what you've been doing recently. They pitch you shows that would just never sit in the context of the other shows that you have, or indeed a show that has just been on last night. You know, so I think you need to watch the channel. You need to understand what works. I say to people a lot, like, I know, you know, overnights are becoming less and less important now in terms of, you know, appraising the success of a show, but there's a still good indicator, and I'd watch stuff every day, and I'd look at the overnights rather every day, look at overall kind of all individuals audience, and look at 16 to 34 audiences and see what young people are watching and where those kind of shifts are, and really try and understand, read as much data as you can on audiences, read as much stuff about audience insights as you can, because often I think if you're immersing yourself in that world and you want to make shows for, I don't know, ITV2, Channel 4, BBC 3, who are focusing, well, pretty much I think all the broadcasters now are kind of trying to have a focus on appealing to younger audiences. Just try and learn what's making those audiences tick, and you'll find sometimes ideas will grow out of something you discover about an audience, about that audience and what they feel about the world. An example, which is quite a counterintuitive example, is Life and Death Row, a documentary series that BBC 3 did, grew out of a piece of audience insight that was saying that more and more young people in the UK today, well, that was originally commissioned, what, 5 years ago, back then, would be in favour of reintroducing the death penalty. And you think, wow, that's a bit kind of unexpected. And then I suppose what that show does, and it was kind of, you know, then it was reimagined in a way that it was a very blue chip documentary series, but it basically brought that audience through what the impact of somebody on death row and somebody who's going to be put to death is. So I think just really try and get inside the heads of audiences, pick up every little nugget or kernel that you can, and out of that ideas will come sometimes.
It's worth also noting that most of the terrestrial channels have quite up-to-date commissioning pages that have commissioners telling you exactly what they want. They have it really, you know, it's really useful. Like, I still look at, even just to refresh my memory if I'm going to see someone, because they'll have what they think was a success for them and what they don't.
And even certain buzzwords that you just sort of sneakily sort of go, oh, this is a very warm show.
Oh my God.
Because they've been talking about how warmth is the most important thing at the moment.
Okay, so you've got your idea, you've got the treatment, now the big thing, the pitch, right? So you've managed to grab the commissioner's attention, you've got your treatment in, you've been invited to come and see somebody like Damien. What kind of preparation are you doing, and what's even the timeline on that with somebody?
Long, always long.
Okay.
But the timelines for the whole thing are long, aren't they?
Yeah.
No, but they're kind of, you might get a meeting like in a month's time if you're lucky. Sometimes 3 or 4 months, they'll be like, right, next slot in the diary is 3 or 4 months.
And within that time, you'd hope, if they've invited you in, having read the treatment, then they've probably fed back on the treatment, and so you'd spend that time sort of looking at their criticisms of it or the things that they liked and trying to bring them to the fore. You might be trying to sort of flesh them out in terms of thinking of what talent you might suggest in the room. And also we sit there before our meetings and go, what could they ask us? What are the holes in this? Because we want to have an answer, even if there's something they don't like, we want to have an alternative.
And it's a weird thing where you've done loads and loads of work, you have answers to loads of questions, but you don't want to bombard them with information. So it starts off quite cash, and you're like, here's just this idea we've been thinking about, here it is. And then but you have to be really, really prepared. So you've done tons and tons of work, but you don't want to be like, here's all the work we've done, and then there's this, and then there's that, and then...
Almost you have to do the work to appear casual about the whole thing.
So do you have a kind of a slick, I mean, do you like rehearse? Do you have a sort of hierarchy of who says what? How do you kind of appear seamless but understated in the room?
It depends on the stage it's at. If it's a first pitch, it's quite conversational, and you talk them through your process. I think is quite useful sometimes. Like, this is where we almost tell them where you got the idea from, and it can help if it's sort of been inspired by their brief, or I don't know. I think you're taking them on a bit of the journey with them. But then, if it's like a final pitch to the head of the channel, you have half an hour to sell the show or not. Yes, we rehearse. Absolutely, and we will have fine-tuned, and you'll probably have had help from your commissioners, because they know their channels so well.
They're championing it.
Yeah. And they were like, well, to your point, Damien, that's here. You want good ideas, don't you?
I think at that stage, if someone's read your treatment and they're inviting you in to discuss the idea, they want it to work as well. So I think just be really well prepared. You'd be surprised the amount of pitches at that stage that actually fall apart because people are not prepared for all the questions. They don't like it to, what you were talking about earlier about can this sustain is a very simple question, and where's the story engine in this that's going to make it sustain? And if people can't answer that, and I think another thing is when you go in there, if you're at that stage, love your idea. It's like people buy into people's passion for something. And if you love it and you know why you want to make it and you know what it'll bring to the audience, and somebody can feel that coming out of your pores. So I think while you're at that stage, the wins are with you, and it's just kind of, I think you've got to really try and sell it in a passionate way, but know it and be prepared to be interrogated. Because if there's a single doubt at that stage, it's probably not going to happen.
Especially if it's going to their boss, because they're not going to risk embarrassing themselves in front of it's their neck on the line at that stage.
And they have to pitch it, so you have to give them the sort of tools to pitch it the best way they can, because then they have to sell it in, and it's their, I think the sort of hardest one is the first pitch, especially a first meeting, because I think it probably takes 6 or 7 meetings before you get any traction with the commissioner, often, because they need to trust that you can deliver it, that you have understood their tone. Just because they're in the same department as another person doesn't mean they have the same tastes. And, you could talk to 2 separate people from the same team, but they have completely different personal tastes. And so it's a slow old process.
And sometimes we'll go to a commissioner meeting and they won't like anything that we've pitched, but we'll come out feeling quite buoyed up because the feedback they've given us has made us think we are sure now what they want. Next time we go in, we will be able to pitch them something they really like. And the next time we go in and we do, I think that from a commissioner's point of view is quite good because it shows that we're adaptable and we've listened.
Yeah.
So Damien, as put your kind of old commissioner hat on now, you've obviously seen hundreds of pitches. Have you got any examples of stuff that's just been really exceptional and something that's like really stood out, even if it didn't kind of go the full length, but something that you were particularly impressed by?
Funnily enough, I do, and we're about to talk about it now. I don't know if people are familiar with a show called Glow Up that we did. It was a makeup show that the guys here did for us on BBC Three. And I think, that was one of those ideas that I think from just the initial kind of, treatment. And I think we're going to show a pre-title here and then show the final pitch the document for the show. That went on quite a journey, and it changed along the way, and stuff that was in it, including the title. It was originally called Face Off. But I think when I saw it at first, and we kind of had a first initial conversation about it, you could see that it was a show that had ambition, it had scale. You could see that it was a show that was taking some insights about the audience and really understanding what that audience was responding to, which was kind of, you know, makeup tutorials online were absolutely going off the scale on YouTube for a BBC Three demographic. I think it also kind of, you know, didn't just leave it at that. It was an idea that kind of felt it wanted to bring it into the real world. It wanted to kind of add a sense of kind of, you know, this aspirational kind of journey to it, where kind of, you know, the competitors within it were going to kind of be working with some of the biggest talents in the business. It was a show that talked about endeavour, or was people being rewarded for endeavour and craft. And, you know, when I first saw it, you could kind of think to yourself, a makeup show on the BBC, and these shows were going to, you know, inevitably they play on BBC One, and you kind of think that could feel quite small. But I think what this felt, and kind of from the pitch, and even from the original pitch stage, it actually felt like a kind of premium art show. This was about art, and this was about craft, and this is about people who are at the top of their game. So, you know, it just felt at that stage that we have to have a conversation about this. And then I think, do we want to show the pre-title, and then we can discuss it a bit more on how what happened in that journey?
In bedrooms up and down the country, a makeup revolution has begun. Now, out of thousands that applied, 10 aspiring makeup artists have a chance to make it in the real world.
It's absolutely ruthless out there.
For 8 weeks, they're going to live together, work together.
But I'm just going to stand here and do nothing then.
We should be doing a lot. And battle it out. Knock it out of the park.
A bit like a shaking hand on that.
To impress some of the biggest names in the business. Each week, they'll need to show skill,
Marvellous.
artistry, and imagination.
It's so beautifully executed.
Both in the studio with their own creations,
You've delivered!
and out fulfilling briefs on some of the industry's toughest assignments.
Catwalk now! You need to go.
From catwalk to fashion mags,
Brush up the breast.
cinema to social media. Every week, the two who least impress
I can't breathe.
will head into a face-off. The loser goes home.
Smashed it.
Until just one remains to land a contract assisting the world's biggest makeup artists. It's time to glow up.
I'd like that to deserve a round of applause. I'd want Anything else you want to add?
I think we've got the pitch document there, and I think, you know, from the kind of get-go, is that the first one, or was that part of the journey? That's quite advanced, isn't it? Yeah. That's quite way down the line. So when it was pitched in the first instance, it didn't have a face-off challenge at the end. If you flip on a page there, I think you see, whoops, it away. See, these were the episodes that we were pitched in the first instance. In the end, I think probably out of that, maybe 2 of those survived, and out of the 8 episodes. And there was a lot more stuff that was kind of, you know, in the real world. It was in, you know, on film sets in the West End, on fashion shoots. There was a Rankin shoot. There was kind of, so it had a real kind of premium quality to it. In the initial, when we started talking about it initially, Stacey wasn't attached. You kind of think on BBC Three, Stacey is such an amazing, brilliant talent for BBC Three. But again, you know, when we started having the conversation with the guys at Wall to Wall, I think we knew what, once we're kind of through conversation, knew what the show was and knew what the contributors will be put through. And then that just gave Stacey's role a kind of, you know, a real sense of purpose within the show, that she was there as somebody who could guide us through the show, kind of explain about the challenges and what was going to happen. But also, and really importantly, I think what she did is kind of, she's brilliant and massively skilled from her documentary kind of experience of kind of getting information out of people about how they feel and stuff like that. So it just gave it another layer where you really felt you were getting something from the contributors. And then crucially, she was a really brilliant shoulder to cry on. And, you know, when we talked about putting Stacey in the show, part of my mind was her on the thumbnail with 2 artists, with 2 people with amazing makeup beside her, because we could put a doc of Stacey Dooley doing, you know, something about, we did a film with her, about the DUP, and it did really well, you know, for even surprised by a young audience. So you knew she had that pulling power, but she made sense in the show. She didn't feel like, there was other suggestions that we talked along the way, and there are people who felt like they were grafted onto it, and you would feel, what are they doing there? So there was legitimacy about her in it. And then also, I think, you know, we had a lot of conversations about the, and if you look at that there, none of those judges made it in the end, and Val Garland and Dom made it. And I think, you know, Val is particularly, and Dom's brilliant as well, but they're going to be huge, huge stars. So I kind of think it was, you know, it was one of those kind of really enjoyable moments. If you saw something that you got excited about, the guys from Wall to Wall came in, and we had quite a lot of very open, very collaborative conversations, and ended up with a show that has done incredibly well. And I think the second series just been commissioned. So
with talent, so you were talking about actually Stacey really bringing it up a level, but that actually wasn't the initial piece.
Yeah.
How important to you, again, with kind of commissioner hat on, is it to have ideal talent attached? And at what part of the process are you expecting people to kind of have a bit more of an opinion on that?
Talent are important, and they can elevate something, but I think you've also got to be careful about, like, I've been pitched tons of ideas that has talent attached, and talent attached in a way if you kind of go, really? Or why? Yeah. And it just feels like somebody's just trying to stick, like a little bit like a Hollywood movie poster, somebody onto it to try and sell it, where they don't have any investment in the idea. And I think particularly for kind of the content that we were making for younger audiences, I think that authenticity and somebody who feels they genuinely deserve to be there, or they have a right to be there, is important. And I think, you know, when you go with talent, I think if you're going to talk to people about talent, have a range of talent, because you don't know what other people are doing, you don't know who's in, who's out, you don't know kind of, you know...
It's personal as well, right?
It's
to the commissioner, sometimes someone can just really annoy them.
And you don't know the direction of travel. That say if you're completely sold on Stacey, you know, there's a real danger with that. When we spoke to Jackie, her agent, that Jackie would go, I want Stacey firmly in the serious documentary space or in the current affairs space, which she has moved a lot more into. So then you're kind of boxed in. So I think, like everything else, I think if there's a message here today, is be open-minded about stuff and be willing to go on a journey with people, because inevitably things will change.
I think it's interesting to say, like, we'd rarely have spoken to talent at the point where you pitch the idea, unless it's built around them and you're saying, you know, like when we pitched Up Late with Rylan for Channel 5 and it was the Rylan Chat Show, well, obviously we'd spoken to Rylan, but like I think what you're saying about what a range of talent does is it sort of goes, oh, it's that sort of show.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of like, none of them might end up being the host, but if you see the sort of, you know, a selection of very prime time Bradley Walsh type people, you're like, okay, it's that's where they're positioning this.
Yeah.
So just
helps with the tone.
Yeah, and the tone is so important, and every element helps to go towards what that tone is. So, you know, Stacey says something totally different to, you know, and it can completely make or break the show. Obviously, in the end, that is so important, but probably...
But there's also a danger, and I did notice it quite a bit when I was at BBC Three. You go through periods of just being sometimes pitch the same talent again and again.
Yeah.
And that's like, you're just going, I'm sure every treatment is going to every broadcaster in the country has the same talent on it. And sometimes, if it's a particular flavour, it can actually obscure the idea. So I think, you know what I mean? I think, be careful.
And I was talking to Tom Davis, who does lots of things, but Murder and Successful was a brilliant thing he did. And he was saying he gets people attaching him to treatments, saying that he's on board and attached and wants to do it, not having even spoken to him. So he'll get a commissioner going, oh, I hear you're... And something was commissioned recently with him as the host, and he'd never even heard about it. Yeah. It had to be decommissioned when he was like, I can't do it. So, you know, it's sort of, to be a bit careful.
Yeah, and we're always on the lookout for, particularly for the younger channels, for new talent as well, because people are always after new people, and we're really jealous of like young Philly on BBC Three, because he is amazing, and you watch him and you go, yeah, I can see if you took a tape of him into a commissioner, they would go, yeah, that is tonally perfect.
Where do you look for that new type of talent?
It all depends, really. Often, I mean, if we're really honest, we don't have that much time to like look, but it would be if someone happens to see something on YouTube or see someone interviewed or hear someone on a podcast.
Go to a stand-up comedy night.
And it'd usually be someone from the team coming in going, oh my God, I went to this stand-up thing and this person was amazing, or I listened to the Adam Buxton podcast and this person was on and they were amazing. We should think of something.
And I think it's hard in telly because there's not that many opportunities for genuinely new talent to break in. So sometimes, you know, what feels like new talent, well, actually, they've been around for ages. But say you're talking to ITV prime time, for them, like, new is someone who's sort of actually been presenting for absolutely ages. Like Caroline Flack, when she started on Love Island, she's been presenting for years and years. Like, I mean, we made a show with her like 15 years ago. But it's sort of, this was her break. And so it's also about kind of like trying to find someone who doesn't feel like everyone's pitching them, but who can do it. Will we have enough of a profile? And it's hard, actually, talent.
Because I guarantee you, after the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh this year, there'll be the same coming through of everybody who's up there developing will be offering the same people to broadcasters. So look, definitely, young Philly we discovered him on YouTube, and he had a music career and stuff. So you know what I mean? It's kind of
So let's get under the bonnet a bit and let's talk about monumental mistakes. Because we learn by mistakes, right? So, Damien, what are some of the worst offenders that you've seen come through your door?
Not having watched the channel,
I
think is an absolute no-no. And, you know, when you go in, you know, normally when you're having a conversation with somebody and they're coming in to pitch you an idea, you do a little bit of a kind of, you know, a broad chat before, and you kind of ask people kind of, you know, what they're watching and stuff like that. And if it's kind of, it's very obvious if somebody doesn't really watch telly. And you kind of, because, you know, you think you want people who are passionate about it and understand what you're trying to do with the channel and what you're trying to kind of, you know, what your attitude towards talent is and how you back talent and so on and so forth. And just on that point, on talent, be very careful when you're in the room about, I've had people who've come in and they've shat all over talent that we've invested a lot in on the channel. So there's nothing that's going to kind of make you think, wow.
And shat all over. I bet people have come in and said, well, I think you made a real mistake commissioning such and such.
Well, yeah, because people have, you know, it is subjective, but if somebody's on the channel and, you know, like Stacey, I'm like everyone I know, I've spoken to her about it, she's, you know, she divides opinion. But if somebody's done 50 plus films for a channel, you might as well assume that the channel controller actually likes them.
Just don't pretend you like them.
No. So I think just kind of disrespecting kind of what's happening, and oh God, there's so many mistakes. The other big one is just not being able to withstand interrogation on an idea, because I think if it's your idea and you know what's at the heart of it, and you're asked kind of simple questions about what am I going to see. And, you know, who are the characters? Where's the investment for the audience? Who are they going to cling on to? Who will they follow? And if you can't answer stuff like that, and believe me, a lot of times people can't answer it. So
I think there's a sort of, there's definitely a sense of also, as well as knowing the channel, I think know the company you're working for. I know people do go in as independent producers, but if you're working for a company, you know, you really have to. And even if you're not at a stage where you're pitching to commissioners, if you're pitching to the boss of that company, you're not going to get anywhere if they're a sort of entertainment company and you're pitching kind of serious one-off documentaries. And, you know, I think it's a question of trust, that relationship. Like, you need to feel like they can trust you to make and deliver that show, not just come up with a good idea. And I think you have to be quite realistic with yourself, and you know, and I've definitely realised that's much more running a company than, but I think like now, you know, when people pitch me, when my team pitch me like stuff, sometimes where I go, that's a great idea, but it's not something that we would make, because there's so many indies that you have to have a specialism and you have to have a reputation. And it's very hard to build that reputation if you kind of make everything. Some companies are just huge and they do, but I think there's a bit of that, isn't there, that you need to be.
And just on that talent point, there's obviously on-screen talent, and just I think when you're going to people and ideas, actually think about who is to that point, who is going to make the show. I know, like, and I worked very closely with Claire Sillery for a long time, and the first question she will ask is who's going to direct it. It's if you've got a documentary idea and you have to have in mind, maybe not that person, you might have a conversation, but this is the direction that we want to take it.
And
I was just going to say, going back to what we were saying before about sort of letting go of your ideas sometimes, you can love an idea and it is heartbreaking when a commissioner just doesn't seem to get it, doesn't like it. But I've been in the room with people more senior than me, not Kat, they're cringing because they're beginning to sort of get slightly aggressive at the commissioner, and you're thinking, this isn't, if someone fundamentally doesn't like your idea, shouting at them is never, ever, ever going to change their mind.
And it's just going to make them never take a meeting with you again.
And there is a reason for that. Sometimes the idea can be okay, but it's just, the truth about running a channel is it's a huge three-dimensional jigsaw. And there's a lot of things at play over and above, just even the individual ideas. It's about kind of, there's talent kind of considerations as what else you've got on the channel, what else you've got in development. So if somebody is pushing back, I think just move on to the next idea.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of pushback, but know when, it's knowing when to and know when to stop. Yeah.
Because it is quite instinctive, like there's lots of practical things, but there is a bit of instinct there of just like, does it capture their imagination? You can kind of see it in their eyes. If their eyes light up, they go, we've got something here. It might not happen, but we're going to get a second meeting.
Yeah.
And also, as you're saying, Damien, as a commissioner, you've got all of these other factors that are playing in right through to, timing, budget, and like you say, similar ideas. So there's sometimes probably when you guys have pitched something, it's actually, there's nothing wrong necessarily with the idea, but maybe it just needs a different time.
Yeah.
Do you mean a different chance, a different channel?
Recently we went in and we had these great ideas we were really pleased with to see a head of a channel, and in our preamble chat that takes sort of 2 minutes, he basically started talking about all the things that he didn't want, and we were like, oh, and had to really and there was no way we could have known.
No.
He just commissioned something, so didn't suddenly want the thing that he'd wanted. And so Kat did amazingly, really quickly, went through our Rolodex of things we've been talking about, and we had to pitch totally, really unprepared, but we had worked on them thankfully enough to be passionate about them and admit, these are quite top-line ideas because,
because you don't want the things that we're about to pitch you. And that happens. The mistake would be then ploughing on with the thing. I think it might have been a dating show or something.
Yeah.
So we've just commissioned a massive reality dating show, and we were like, so you're not going to want this massive reality dating show then? Cool. But that happens, and you just sort of
roll with it.
And also, I do think as well, when I said really love the ideas and be passionate about the ideas you're going to pitch, nothing when you talk about when somebody comes in to pitch to you and they've got 1 to 20 on a page.
Oh, Jesus.
And when you've said, oh, God, some people just don't know when to stop. And I've got another one,
God.
I've got to just go in with the ones that you genuinely feel passionate about and you want to make, because it's not a numbers game.
So 3 is probably
quality.
Good, isn't it? For a kind of first,
So quality
is,
quantity.
Yeah, 3 and then 1 in your back pocket in case they say.
Yeah, they do that.
I don't know if it's a myth, but I did hear one time about at Channel 4, the features team. It was Daisy Goodwin was in seeing Ben Frau, and she'd pitched a lot of ideas and he didn't pick up any of them. And she was leaving. He turned around and said, because his office was pristine, she said to him, "How clean is your house?" And he went, "Oh my God, that's a good idea."
It must be a myth because I've heard it too.
Have you?
No, I think Ben says it happened.
It happened. Yeah. There you go.
But I think sometimes it is the one. We had one of those recently where we went through lots of brand new ideas, and then sort of Kate mentioned at the end, what about this thing? Would that work for this channel? Almost
as we were packing our things up at the end.
She was like, well, hang on, wait.
Yeah.
It's
you
just never know.
So there's some kind of fundamental, we've sort of gone through, I suppose, the 3 main stages, the idea being fluid, but being disciplined, being positive, not being precious, but certainly being passionate. And then I suppose we've got into the treatment, which is being really succinct and clear, and knowing your audience and thinking about where that proposition sits, you know, and how you actually manage to convey that really clearly to a commissioner. And then I suppose, you know, the ultimate bit of the pitch itself and how not to piss off commissioners, certainly no arm wrestling, and also thinking on your feet, right? So you were talking about being really agile and changing your tactics, but still being, you know, authentic with that and knowing the audience, but maybe, you know, maybe changing your slate. I mean, I feel like we've done it all, but I mean, if anyone's got any questions, I'm going to throw over to you guys, and look, and use this time, you know, ask what you kind of really want, you know, want to know, the nuts and bolts, because they'll be very honest, I promise. Yes.
Can we talk about diversity, especially racial diversity? Just looking at the panel here, 2 women, three women. Hey. Sorry about that. But no black or Asian faces. So I just wondered, behind the scenes of your companies, what your racial makeup was, and how you get more black, Asian, minority ethnics onto screen.
Ours is very diverse, actually. We've just taken on someone who was a trainee last year, and she is black, isn't she? Yeah.
That's correct.
Yes, and we've got lots of the production side, different ethnicities. So
I think the way that they do it, like certainly at Endemol Shine, is it's a massive issue, and I almost don't think it's possible to cover. It's such a huge issue that everyone's so aware of across the whole of the TV industry, whether that's channels or production, the whole sector, and you know, the amount of thought and time and energy, and it takes time for those kind of strategies and the targets to really come through onto TV. And I think it's because it's only the last few years that it's even been properly investigated and interrogated. And I do think you're seeing it come through onto screen.
What's brilliant is it's part of the conversation now, where it wasn't 5 years ago. That wasn't something that would be talked about in brainstorms or commissioner meetings, and now it definitely is.
It's on agendas and it's on company objectives.
But it's also from a person who's come from broadcasting side to now running a production company. I'd be incredibly stupid not to think of diversity, because I think my experience on BBC Three, and blow our trumpet a little bit, and I think we still are currently the CDN Commissioner of the Year. I was the diversity champion it's done every 2 years. It's something, and you look at how our content and our output reflected it. We built up a young team on BBC Three of 40 people. It was so diverse. I can draw a straight line between our investment in new and diverse talent to all the awards we won and all the success we did, because I think what we could do is tell stories that were fresh perspectives and fresh ways into something. It's exactly the way I think about running Tiger Aspect. I think if we want to do something that genuinely feels different and feels like not just another turn of the wheel and what everybody else is doing in the industry, we have to embrace diversity and inclusion. And through that, I also mean social class.
Yeah.
It's a big thing. We need those stories told, and I think audiences respond to them massively when they're told.
I've spent the last 2 days doing interviews for our trainee scheme for the Endemol run every year. And what we're looking for is, like you say, a total range of people, because what we don't want is the same 4 people sitting in a room having the same ideas, because no one wants that.
You're right, and it's kind of like, actually, if you want to reflect the people watching telly, you have to hire as much as you can in that, you know, to represent that. And, you know, like the sort of, it's about, yes, racial diversity, but also, like you say, like, you don't want loads of people who've been to Oxford.
We've got Jada now, because she mentions
She's 19.
people and places that I have never heard of.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, hi there. Questions to the panel, really. It's sort of part pitch, part question, really, but why not me? Many years ago, I not only wrote a sitcom, but I also filmed it and shared it online. The first episode was done the first episode was done in 2014. Only last year I actually did some more episodes to it. Just to quickly show you, anyway, briefly, we were featured in local newspaper. See there?
Yep.
We're featured in local newspaper. The idea is, if you want to look it up, boys, look it up, boys. Hashtag #ScumbagsTV. It's essentially kind of Lock, Stock meets Shameless, you could say. And we also got positive feedback from none other than Keith Lemon, as well, which is kind of sort of because you mentioned about target market, and I think he's probably within the ballpark of that target market we're after. My question to you, I suppose, would be that I've got to a stage now where all the videos on our Facebook page that they've got accumulated something like 10,000 views in total, and we are looking to gain on our Facebook, Twitter and Instagram page as well. So I suppose my question is, should I pitch to commissioners, send it to like random people in development, or should I just let it grow organically on social media?
I wouldn't pitch. This is me talking, and I've got no right to talk from a commissioner perspective because I'm not a practice commissioner anymore. But you will not get traction with a commissioner unless you've got an independent production company behind you. It's back to that whole point of question that you always ask in the room, who's going to make it? Right? And it can be your idea, but you need to work with somebody who's got experience of executing a show like that, because when you start getting into that scripted world, it's millions of pounds before you're kind of, anywhere. So I think what you need to do is whatever kind of sitcoms you're influenced by, whatever sitcoms you like, look at who's making those, production companies and individuals, and send them emails and send them links to your work. And I think, go down that route. If you look at like what we, on BBC Three, we did quite a lot of stuff, Hood documentary, lots of things, where these were things people just do nothing, BAFTA winning, discovered online. They started working online. So I think try and find people who share the same sensibility as you and are like-minded in terms of the comedy chops as you are.
So I noticed as well Shane Allen, the current controller of BBC. I noticed that he's opened up something called the British Comedy Foundation. It's something, I'll be honest, it's music to my ears. This is something that really should have been done years ago. Really.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But go for it, and I think just go in through a production company, because going to a commissioner, they don't take unsolicited stuff.
Okay. Yes, lady up here. Hold on, we're just getting you a mic.
Hello. Thank you for telling us more about From Page to Pitch. I think it was very useful. But as someone who is just starting out, I'm really curious, how do you start? Like, how do you get to be part of a development team, to get to know the right people, or get to have your ideas heard?
Good question.
Yeah.
Well, actually, so I started as the trainee scheme that Kate was doing the interviews for today is how I started a long time ago, which was you didn't need to have any experience. I was working in a shop, and I just saw an ad, and it just said, send in some ideas, and they give you some sort of briefs, and then you get picked to come and do some brainstorming and pitching and things and have an interview and stuff. And then they pick 4 every year, and that's still going. And there are lots of those sorts of schemes. The Endemol was the first one, I think, to do it, and the BBC had one as well.
I started on one at 12 Yard.
Yeah, and I think lots and lots of the bigger indies have them now, so it's really worth researching. And none of them care if you have a media degree. Sometimes better if you don't. Or, it's like what they want is for you to be bright, creative, and love television, like really love it and watch it. And I think there's loads of those, and also there's running as well.
Like I say, I've been doing them for the last 2 days, and what we want is like a total diversity of voices and passion. You'd be amazed how many people you sort of go, oh, so what are you enjoying on TV? And if they can't sort of excitedly talk about shows they love, then you think you don't really want this. You aren't keen enough.
And I think like if you do get to the point where you have an interview with a company about being on their development team or being a development runner, or then talk about the kinds of shows they make. Not necessarily just, but people just sort of saying again and again that they like Game of Thrones. It's a brilliant show, but we make game shows in reality. And actually, if they say, I love it too, but if at least to be able to say we don't make Love Island, but I'd love to hear what you think of Love Island. So that's our type of telly, and it might be it's different for Tiger, but I think that's worth bearing in mind. And if you work in a production and you're a runner, but you're still interested in development, pester the development team with ideas.
Where do you advertise that, guys? Is that on your website or?
The website, Creative Access, the Guardian media
all
section, all the social media ones. Yeah, it's quite widely.
Lots of press publications that
Right.
try and get, and like, it's the hardest thing I have to say has been, and we've found really good ways in getting it out there to people who don't, like, social media has been brilliant for that, but like it used to be really hard to get people out who are non-graduates, who don't necessarily read the paper. And actually I think that's why social media has been so great, because people can share it. And
it's managed, for you to be able to diversify your
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Where's the mic going?
I can just try and speak louder.
we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
It's coming, it's coming.
Brilliant. Thank you. So my background is in film, and I've transitioned into TV just organically with the writers that I was working with. So I have no background in TV. So my question is, when you're approaching the channel or a production company, because I'd like to team up with a production company, a TV production company that has a track record in producing TV series. So in that first email pitch, be it to a channel or production company, do you think it's best to pitch one project or two projects, which is what I have? Because I know earlier you said always have 3 maximum pitches, but I guess that's when you're face to face and one hasn't worked and you can come up with another. But the first email pitch to a channel or production company, do you think it's just best to go in with one pitch about one project?
You're working in the scripted world?
Yes, high-end scripted.
Gem, wow. One or two, if they're two.
I keep hearing different things. So some companies will say, "Oh, just come in with one." Others will be like, two.
What I try and do is contact the development team, be aware of what the production company's doing. Tell the people, if you do genuinely like their work, that you like their work and you'd like to have a coffee.
I would say exactly that.
And you'd like to have a coffee. I wouldn't pitch to them via email at that stage. I'd flatter them a little bit, that you love what they're doing, you love their ambition, you love and that you have access, and think about what you've got to offer them. You have access to, I don't know, new writers, kind of different voices. You've noticed that there might be a gap in what their slate is at the moment, and I think go in that route.
We don't actually...
Most people would say, if you email me, I'm going to get 50 emails tomorrow, but most people will say they'll meet you for coffee, guarantee it.
And we have a sort of blanket policy. We just don't accept unsolicited third-party ideas, because it becomes very complicated. Because if you've had a similar idea in your development team, which is very possible, and that person, and you say, "Oh yeah, I'll read your idea," and then you turn it down, and then in 2 years' time, something similar ends up coming out of your department or somewhere else in the company, then they're saying, "You stole my idea," and you know. So we just don't even look at or open those kind of. But if someone emailed saying, looking to get into TV, really, you know, specifically looking to get into the kind of thing you do, would you or someone on your team be able to have a cup of tea and a chat? Then you could pitch an idea in that meeting, of course, you know. But I think if you're sort of giving me I mean, it's different. I don't know if it's different for scripted, but I think...
Well, we're always looking for new writers. If you've got relationships with new writers,
Thank you. I've never been given that advice, and that's really useful.
Worth a try.
FaceTime, you see, if you can get it.
And, you know, use events like this. I don't know what the range of genre that's in this room are, but people will know people, and if you've got an idea you're excited about, talk to people about it, and you never know where it'll lead to.
Right, we've got time for one more question, but I promise everyone's going to be around for a drink afterwards, so come and kind of grab people. Right at the back.
Make it a good one.
I'm Faraz. I run a small independent production company. You guys are obviously umbrellaed by a multi-billion-pound company, I think it is. So you've got some money, and development is a bit of an issue when it comes to return on investment. One of the most things that we're thinking about at the moment is... traditionally, we would look at copywriters when it comes to development, making sure the idea sells itself on paper. But we're moving slowly more towards video and tape. And the people that we want to get in are people that can really tell amazing stories in a minute or less. I'd like to kind of get your opinion on, is tape a good thing or is it a bad thing? It's expensive. Sometimes it can put you in an idea and you can't really get out of it when you're pitching. When do you use tape? Do you like it when you see it in a meeting? Where do you sit on
It's a really good question. We actually meant to cover a bit about visuals, which we sort of didn't get to, but now we can.
Yeah,
beautifully segued.
Yeah, thank you. We didn't plant them in the audience, I promise. I think tape can be really useful, and increasingly, if you're pitching to an American channel like Netflix or something like that, have to have tape.
And also, even though it is costly in terms of people's time and things like that, when we first started in TV, we'd have to go down to the edit and book an editor, and someone would properly do it. Now, someone from the team does it on their laptop for the most part.
And it doesn't, so when we're talking about tape sort of from the kinds of shows we look at, I guess we're talking about like a promo or a little kind of, or sizzle tape, they're sometimes called, or taster tape. And it depends on the idea. Not all ideas need it, but you need something visual, because we work in a visual medium and words on the page aren't enough. And so, you know, if you have a poster, great. If you can do PowerPoint, I know it sounds ridiculous, but PowerPoint in development is so useful. And like, you know, and actually it's amazing what you can produce on PowerPoint, and or, you know, a bit of Photoshop skills. I'd learn those things because you're so valuable as a developer with those. But I think if it's, not everything needs tape, but if it's the sort of thing where you think, wow, this would make such a good sizzle tape, might be worth making a little one and just doing it on your laptop. I think, you know, it does help.
One of the Channel 4 commissioners was telling me the other day that they commissioned something, an idea that they had sort of heard before, but the company had brought in tape examples of the cast. I think it was parents and their kids who wouldn't move out of home or something, which is something we've talked about a lot. But she said the casting was so brilliant on this tape, it made everyone laugh out loud, and they got development from that.
I agree. I think learn how to have people in your team who can use Photoshop, PowerPoint, somebody who can cut stuff that looks really nice. I think is, you know, Tiger Aspect is predominantly a scripted business. And we're talking a lot now about investing in people within the teams who can visually present something. Even though 100% of what we're going to have will be final decision, it'll be made on a script. But what we're realizing now is we have to encourage people to want to read that script. So if you can add visuals to it, and that could even be just cutting a little kind of mood reel or something, just something that sells the tonality and the sensibility of it, that makes it kind of rise above everything else. It's in fact, we work in a visual medium.
But I think it's sort of the balance. It is tricky, I think, especially if you don't have a huge amount of investment. We're lucky because we have got a development pot of money, and it does cost time. Even if it is just you on a laptop, that's your time is money. So I think you know, if it gives it something that you couldn't get across on a page, whether that's talent or just the tone or just the kind of, like often we make our sizzles using like bits from films or random other shows or whatever, but some commissioners don't have great imaginations. I'm sure Damien definitely does. But, you know, and like actually the less they have to sort of imagine how good it would be, the more they can see it.
Or there's times you can preempt. We did a show, I won't say which one it was now, on BBC Three, that it was talent-led, and it was a talent who did a very particular type of thing. The show was moving them into a different space. So a tape came along that showed the talent doing that, and it just straight away, I get it, and it was a sell, and it was commissioned as a series. So I think.
Does it happen the other way around? Have you had instances where you see the tape and actually you've gone, oh, actually, I don't like that idea?
Yeah,
but that happens, you know. But maybe that's because I don't think it's because of the tape.
Yeah.
It's just because it's not a very good idea.
It's not the tape's fault.
Yeah.
And we're not at the stage yet, I think, in the UK where you can't go in without tape.
No.
I don't think we're there. Like, I think, you know, we make quite a lot of our tapes just to sell internationally, because you really do need it then, because it's pitching in a second language. But I think just used judiciously, it's useful.
Also because quite often you'll pitch to the commissioner and then they'll pitch to their boss. It's quite useful because then you know your message
not going to mess
is
it up.
getting across in quite a simple way, and the tone that you want, you are more in control of that if you've handed them over a tape for them to play.
I think it comes back to standing out and de-risking that commission, right? So obviously all of the American tech companies, they all want tapes, and it comes back to that because they all deal with each other via email, they're all on different time zones, so even if you've got in to see the person in London, the person in Los Angeles is making the creative decision, and it's, even if it's, you know, so if it's a scripted piece where it wouldn't be very economical necessarily to do a tape, even if it's the essence of or the type of mood of, and it's something that's standing out in their inbox of hell, right? And and Facebook will say that directly to you because they have to then input everything into a form. And if they've got a video, that's the thing that gets shared around their team, not even the best piece of kind of one page of PDF. So I think it's about being really harsh on how efficiently you can produce it. But if it's worth it, do it.
Sometimes it's not even cutting together something. Like, say you've been inspired by something on YouTube.
Yeah.
There was this Dutch game show where they played games in the dark, and there was this brilliant game where there's just this man, and this is when we pitched the Almost Impossible game show. It was just this man, Dutch man, in a lycra suit in the dark, and he had to count to 10, and something was going to smash him on the legs if he didn't jump over it. And it was so funny because he was just very serious, counting in Dutch to 10, and then was hitting the legs. And we went into the pitch and said, this is funny, but wouldn't it be even funnier if he kept having to do it until he got it right, again and again and again, and we're playing it again. And actually, we like to illustrate the comedy of repetition. So it's not always necessarily let's cut a thing, but having something visual, even if it's just ripped off another TV show or YouTube, that would be funny. Look up, it's brilliant. Dutch man, unitard, smashed in the legs. Yeah.
So key takeout: wear lycra if you can't afford to make a video with someone wearing it.
Don't knock into the pitch.
Thank you so much for your time tonight. I think we deserve to give them a round of applause.